Hello friends, welcome to Edwiki Learning channel. Please do subscribe to get more updates on the DevOps concepts. This video is part of the full course AWS DevOps Practitioner training. Please do check the description below to get the link for the complete full course. Without further delay, let's get into the video. Thank you.
Right, so usually, right, you will never understand all the concepts whatever I'm delivering, right, in the session itself. It takes some time basically, right? You guys are pretty new and to understand all of these, right? So whenever you don't understand, right, even the DevOps is not a technology, it is a thought process. Okay, that means uh, everyone is learning the DevOps technology, right? How are you thinking about it, how it will be useful for us? I mean to say, the DevOps is all about the thought process, guys. That means what is your analysis on this? What is your thought process? How you are going to use this technology for your use cases? That is what all about it, right? So don't treat that the DevOps is like a technology which you are learning in. No. What does it mean, right? If it is just a technology, it will be same everywhere. Hope you got me what I'm trying to write. If it's just a technology, it will be same everywhere. Whichever the company you go, whichever the project that you take on, right, that will never change. Everywhere it will be the same commands, same pattern, same flow. Then that is the technology, right? The DevOps is not a technology, it is a thought process. So whatever I'm delivering today, right, it will be used in a different way in each company, in each project. There will be no similarity from project to project as well, right? So it's all about the individual, your leader, your manager thought process, how they wanted to use this DevOps to fix their business problem. You will know what does it mean by this statement as and when I'm going through the upcoming lectures, right? So it mean that by the end of the DevOps course, right, what is that I'm expecting? You guys are not just learning the technology, you have to improve your thought process as well. That is where you will be, uh, get into a DevOps domain to work and work guys. Okay. So being said that, just to go into that route, right? Whenever you don't understand the topic, right? Rather you thinking that the instructor is not delivering properly. Of course, I may be not delivering sometimes as per your expectation. It happens sometimes, but still, rather thinking that the instructor is not delivering properly and I'm not able to understand what it is, the other way around, okay, look like the instructor is delivering properly, somehow I am not able to get it. Let me go and check the video one more time. Let me explore further. Let me do little more research. Let me ask the right questions to get a right answers from the group or from the instructor. You got me? So that is how your thought process has to be improved, guys. Okay, that will definitely help you to learn the things. The reason, the moment when you think that the instructor is not delivering properly, that's it. You'll stay there only, saying that you are putting that to someone else or to me, that he is not delivering and I'm not learning, right? And we'll be there only. Rather, if you think that maybe I need to do little more extra time to learn the things, maybe he is delivering properly, then definitely you will look after the next level of opportunities, or right, you put a lot of time to right, to get the more things. So that is where your thought process has to be improved here. That is very important to become this into this particular domain, guys. Okay. So usually I'm just giving these kind of the kick-off notes that definitely helps you guys, not just going and teaching some technical concepts. Okay, so now let me get into the concepts. So probably I'm thinking by today we will be done with most of the Linux basics that we would be needed to get into the core deeper AWS concepts, right? So I think we are already uh, talking about the Linux permissions, right? How the Linux permissions will help us or help the owner of the file or directory to determine the file can be accessible by which users and what is the level of the permissions that the other users can do on his file or directory, right? And we talked about that the Linux has right, the read, write, execute permission for a file under the directory, and the differences between the file and directory, we have talked about it. Just to have a quick glance about these permissions one more time, right? We have the read permission, right? Just to recap the things, we have the read permission, we have the write permission, we have the X permission, right? And these permissions will be differ from the file to the directory, right? So if you are having the read permission for the file, that is where you can execute that cat command against the file. If you are having the write permission, you can do the VI. And if you are having the read permission to the directory, you can run the ls command on that directory. The write permission for the directory in the sense you can remove the file, or you can create a file. You can remove the directory, or you can create a directory in that directory, right? And the X permission in the sense you can do the cd command to go inside the directory, right? So always be careful. Sometimes you need to look at the permissions of the immediate directory where you are currently. Sometimes you may need to check the permissions of all the parent directories as well, because you need to pass on, or you need to switch to all the different parent directories to reach the last level of directory to do any operation, right? If the parent directory does not have a permission, obviously you cannot go and enter into the further nested directories to do something. So right, so that's how we need to do all of this. Well, so I'll just take one simple scenario here, right? So for now, let me create one simple file, guys, just to begin with a few leftover items on the permission concepts. Okay, so if you look into this particular ls minus l output, okay, so uh, yeah, so let me talk about this first. So any file will definitely having a owner membership and the group as well. The owner will definitely, like the guy, the user who has created a file will become the owner. And of course the owner can be changeable using the root, sometimes using a ch1 command. That's a different case, right? So the file can be part of a default one group. I mean to say, a file or directory cannot be created without any group, so there should be some group always. So today I'm telling about how this group is assigned for this particular file, right? In the same way, I'm just taking easy to happen user as an example here, right? In the same way, any user that gets created in the Linux system must be part of at least one single group. Without a group assignment, a user will not exist in the Linux system. Being said that, whenever you create any username, by default, there will be one more group also will be created. The group name will be the same as the username, not to just to confuse, both are different. The group name is same as the group username only, and by default, that user will be belonging into that particular group. That's how it works, right? So the user can be part of a primary group and the secondary groups, right? So at any given point of the time, a user can part of only one primary group, but the user can be a part of multiple secondary group sections. In this scenario, you see that the easy to happen user is the user. If you look into the secondary groups, this user is part of easy to happen user, which is default, part of a user called ADM, part of part of the group called ADM, part of the group called wheel, something like this. Don't worry about these group names. The name could be anything, right? So here the user is part of multiple secondary groups, right? But the user is part of only one primary group always. What is the difference between the primary group section and the secondary group, right? So whenever the user is creating a file or directory, by default, the file that is being created should be assigned with one group, right? That group will be taken from the owner's primary group section. In this scenario, if you look at the EC2 hyphen user, the primary group is EC2 hyphen user, right? Hence the reason whenever this user is creating a file, by default, the file group will become the sorry, by default, the group of the file will become the primary group of that particular user. Make sense? Just to repeat again, though your user is part of multiple groups in this scenario, right? Always the file or directory group will be the primary group of the user. That's the purpose of the primary group. What is the purpose of the secondary groups, guys? Right? Whenever this user is part of this many number of secondary groups, then whenever this user is trying to access any file or directory, if those files and directories are part of these same groups, then this user is eligible to have or use the group permissions on that particular file or directory, right? So pretty much the secondary groups are the way to give the group permissions to this particular user whenever the file or directory is in the same matching group. But what is the purpose of the primary group? That will help to assign this primary group as a default group for the file and directory when it is being created. I'll prove that now. So I'll just go to root because sometimes the ordinary user is not having much permissions to do something, right? So from the root, let me create one simple user. Maybe I'll use EC2 hyphen user only for now. Okay. I'll just create one group. For example, group add, I'll say DevOps group. Now user mod, modify the user hyphen G DevOps group for EC2 hyphen user ID EC2 hyphen user. Now you see, guys, I just have used the lowercase g flag over there. The lowercase g flag will tell that the primary group has to be changed to this. Now if you look into this user properties and you see this, the primary group is changed. Sometime back the primary group was EC2 hyphen user. Now I changed the primary group of this user is to DevOps. So yesterday I have shown you the command to add a group to the secondary group section, right? By using hyphen A and hyphen uppercase G flag. The lowercase g flag is to update the primary group section. Now what will be the effect now by changing the primary group of this particular user? So now onwards, whenever the user creating a file or directory, those files are being created with the group called DevOps, isn't it? I'll show you that. Let me logging into the instance one more time. I will log in as EC2 hyphen user, ID EC2 hyphen user, just to ensure that the user is part of which groups. Now let me create a file called F2. Now let me verify the F2 file. Right? If you see the F2 file, the group, right? The group is currently DevOps. How come the file is got created using the DevOps group? By default, because currently, right, the user's primary group is DevOps, that is being assigned as a default group for the file as well when it is getting created, guys. So just to conclude the topic, right, a user will be part of a primary group, and always there will be only one primary group for a user that can be changing from the root, and it can be part of multiple secondary groups. The primary group will be assigned as a default group for the file or directory when it is being created. Let's say I just have created a directory and I see that the directory got created with the group called DevOps because that is the primary group of this particular user, whoever is creating this directory. So in real time, right, whenever you have a requirement that, hey, always whenever this user is creating a file or directory, those should be get created with this particular group. If you have that kind of a requirement, make that group as a primary group of the user, then always those will be created with the same group only. We don't need to change the group once the file is created. Good. So that's the difference between primary group and the a secondary group. Whenever you run ls-l command, the permissions that you see here in the long listing format are called as a base permissions. These base permissions will help you to assign the permissions to the owner to one single group, which is the group of the file, and for rest of all others. Sometimes you may have a requirement that one group should have one permission, another group people should have a different permission, or maybe I want to give read permission for one user, read write permission for another user, read write execution permission for another user, only the X permission for another user. You got me what I'm trying to? That means I wanted to decide a particular permission for each and every individual user. Then that is not feasible using these base permissions. Even if you want to give the permissions, like as I see in the chart window, group 1 should have this, group 2 should have this, group 3 should have this. No, that is not feasible using these base permissions. If you have a requirement like I need to give the permission for each and every individual user separately by calling the group name or a file name, then we need to use the concept called extended permissions or special permissions, I would say, right? So maybe I'll talk about here only. Yeah. So then that is called as a special permissions. So the special permissions are called as a ACL permissions, right? The ACL permissions, the command is setf-acl. So the setf-acl is the command which will allow you to specify the permissions to the file for the individual group or individual user if you have anything such that. If you don't know how to use this command, let's say, not only this command, any command that you are working, right? If you don't know the flag, you forgot the flag, you don't know how the command works, then you can use the command called man and space, then give the command that you wanted to know more. This will open a documentation. This documentation will talk about what is this command purpose, how to use the command. If you hit enter, this command has which flags, how the each flag will work for us. Just kind of a documentation to read it and understand if this command works for us in an efficient way. Somewhere you can even see some examples of how to use this command as well. And somewhere you see this guys setf-acl-x, sorry, x for removing, right? Granting is for like him. You see this. This is the command to give the read permission only for this particular Lisa user, not for all. Got me? This is not feasible using the base permissions, guys. If you are using the ACL permission, it is possible to give the permission for a specific user. So this read permission only for this Lisa user, not for just like that others are group members. Got me? Like that, it is possible to set the permission to the a specific set of people as well by running these ACL commands, something like this. Let's say here, I would say group add, let's say AWS group, right? So this is my F1 and AWS group, and this is the group. So this is how, let me take this command. My file is in here, right? That's the reason, right? You see, now for this F1 file, I have given the read permission for AWS group, but you can't see that in ls-l because the ls-l is only talking about the base permissions. Whenever the file is having the ACL permission, then you will be seeing the plus mark there. The plus will tell that it has some additional ACL permissions as well. If you want to see those additional ACL permissions, then you need to run the command called getfacl and the file name. This command will tell you if it has any additional extra permissions. You see here, right? By default, it has the base permissions, the owner permission, group permission, and others, right? And whatever you see here, these are the extra permission. This particular AWS group people are having the read permission, that is the ACL permission, guys. Like that, we can set the additional, right, the specific permissions if you wanted to using this ACL commands. Now, whenever a user is part of multiple groups, right, out of all these groups, which group can be a primary group? This is not something that you are me deciding or randomly picking. The business will decide, right? So hey, if this user is creating the file or directory, always I'm expecting it to be in a DevOps group. So that's how the business will decide, and whichever the primary group that the business is expecting will make that as a primary group. Usually, if that user is a DevOps member, obviously I will expect that that has to be in a DevOps as a primary group, something like this. I mean to say, the file and directories that are getting created by that user is using by whom, correct? If those are using by the DevOps team members, I'll expect the files to be in a DevOps group. If these are being used by a different team, different set of people, make it into a different group, right? It just business will decide which one will be a primary group for that particular user based on the requirements. Now, I think let me do touch F7. Whenever you create a file, you see that by default some metadata is getting updated. By default, you see some base permissions are getting assigned for your file. How these base permissions are assigned? I mean to say, how it is decided that your file has to be created with 644 permissions by default. Got me? So there is a logic, right? So if you think that my file should be 666 permission, each time when you are creating the file, it is creating with a 644. Then again I need to run the command and make the change to this file, correct? If that is a requirement. You see, I made it into 666 permissions, right? Why should I worry about changing the permissions to the file? So can I make the default permissions itself to 666 if that is a requirement? Getting me? So that is where we need to understand on what basis these default permissions are applicable to the file or maybe to the directory when the file or directory is being created. In Linux, the default file permissions are 666. This is the standard concept, guys. Any Linux that you take, by default, the permissions will be 666 for the files, right? And now you decide when you are creating a file, by default, the file to be created using which permissions that you are looking for. Let's say when I create a file, the file to be created with 622 as an example. That means every time when I create a file, my file should come with a 622. But as per the Linux concept, the default file permissions are 666, right? But I am looking for 622. That is where you can adjust the permissions using the value called umask. There is a umask value that you can apply to your Linux system user. In this case, if I apply the umask as 022, this is my umask value, then it will get subtracted from the base permissions. The actual file permissions are 666. You have set your umask, a user mask value, right, to 022. Now 6 minus 2, sorry. If you are looking for 622, then it should be like 044. This is your umask value, right? It will be get subtracted from that main permissions, and your result will be the actual permissions that will be applicable to your file. That's how it works, right? The default umask value is 022, guys, right? So that means when the Linux system is prepared for you by the AWS, by default your system will be configured with the 022 as the umask value. Now what will be the output of the actual permissions that are being reflected to your file after subtracting the permissions to your umask value? It will be 644. That is the reason whenever you create a file, you see again I'm creating a F9 file. You see the file is got created with a 644. The only reason is 666 minus the umask value, the result is 644. If you want to know what is the umask value that is currently defined here, you can run the command called umask. Now you see your value. Don't worry about the starting 0, right? Just take these three numbers, 0, 2, 2. Let me do a simple change. Let's say umask, right? Umask, I want to change this umask value as per my requirement, right? Umask, then let's say 622. You see now, I just have modified this umask value to 622. Now, if I create a file called, I'll say F6. Now, tell me guys, what will be the permissions of F6 file? I'm focusing on the default permissions that will be applicable to the file. How I'm, managing that. So what will be the permissions of F6 file the moment when the file is created in this case? So 666 minus and your umask value is 622 because I made a change. I have changed my umask value to this number, right? Now it is 622. So if you do a simple calculation here, the 666 is the default permissions and my umask value is 622, the right? As a result, the answer is 044. Is it happening there? Yes. The owner is 0, group is 4, others are also 0, sorry 4. That's how the umask value is effective here. So whenever a user is creating a file, right, you are expecting what are the default permissions. Accordingly, you define your own umask value and that will be effective, guys. And that will decide your default permissions, how it has to be. Are we good with this? It's your requirement, how you wanted to set your umask value. But the default, when your system gets created, it will come up with the 022, but you can change always however you wanted it to be. The same logic will be applicable for directories as well, but for the directories, the default permissions are 777 and your umask value will be get subtracted from 777. In this case, if the umask value is 622, right, then the result will be like 155, right? So you will get these permissions of whenever you create a directory. Let me try that. mkdir, let's say dir3 ls minus ld dir3. Now you see that I'm getting 155. Those are the default permissions that are applied for the dir3 based on this particular logic. The same umask value will be get subtracted from 660, 666 for file, 777 for the directory. Let me clear the screen. The umask value is actually applicable at a user level. That means the EC2 user may have a different umask value, and the different user may have its own umask value. Every user can have their own umask value if they wanted to maintain at their level, because the umask is something deciding the default permissions for the file and directory which are being created by that particular user, right? How the user is expecting the default permissions, the user can decide his own umask. That means the umask is not a system level configuration. This is the user level. Each user can maintain their own umask value. As I see the question in the chat window, if you wanted it to be like 777, your umask value will be 000, right? It has to be subtracted to 000, and the result will be like this. Now, what is my umask value at this time, guys? So my EC2 user umask value is 622, correct? Now let me log into the instance again, right? I'm just showing all the different possibilities. I'm showing some scenarios. So my umask value is 622. I'll close my terminal. I will log in again. Now you observe that, right, your default umask value is assigned again. That means what? The umask value that you have changed, that is the temporary. When you relog in, these settings are gone again. You see, again I'm getting some default one. I'm not, like, the changes that you made are not persistent here, isn't it? Right? So that means not only here, most of the times some changes will not be persistent, will be applicable only for this particular session. Once you close the session, once you open the new session, the things will be changing. Like, it will go back to the previous old one only. So if you really wanted to keep these settings permanently, like even after login, I want my umask value to be the same always, then you need to customize your profile, a user profile, right? So usually in every user's home directory, if you do ls-l, currently I'm in the user's home directory, right? If you do ls-l, right, and you see these files. If you do ls-la, I'm just using the another flag called a flag. When you do a flag, you are seeing a few more files, guys, correct? The files that are started with a dot, those files are called as a hidden files in the Linux system. Those hidden files will not be appeared by default when you use the L flag. To see the hidden files, you need to use the flag called A. And in these hidden files, there is a file called dot bash underscore profile. This is the profile configuration file for a particular user, which is available on the user's home directory as a hidden file. So you need to open this file and put your settings here. Don't like delete anything which is existing. So let's say in my requirement, umask values to be 622. This should be a permanent, right? Even if the user login again, I want the same to be, right? So then you define your commands here, right? Then even at the next login, still you will get the new umask only. It will not go back to the previous one because this file is being processed every time when you logging into the system. Like that, every user will have this file in their home directory. That's how the user can customize their profile, how what permanent settings would be required in their profile file. Clear? Sometimes, some configuration I wanted to make it for everyone, right? Hey, this setting should be for everyone. All the users on my system should get the same configuration, right? Same setting. Like in this case, everyone should get the same umask value 622. If that is my requirement, you can put that into a file called /etc/profile. Same thing. The dot bash underscore profile that I have edited some time back, that is applicable to the specific user in which home directory that you are editing. /etc/profile is the file. This is applicable for all the users. If you keep your umask value in this file, then that will be applicable for every user, right? So this file cannot be edited using the ec2-user because of the permission issue. You see this? If you look into this file, id ec2-user, right? This file is currently owned by the root in the root group. ec2-user will become the others. Others are having only read permission for this file, right? So I can't edit. Only root can edit. If you see the content of this file, it has a lot of some scripts and all. Don't worry. But if you just go to the down of the file and just add umask, then that will be applicable for all the users. That is what is called as a /etc/profile file. Simply put, any change that you wanted to make it as a permanent and wanted to apply for everyone, we need to keep it in the profile configuration file. Now, I think so far I talked about read and write, right? I didn't talk about the X permission. Let me see what is X permission for the file. For the directory, we already talked about that, right? The X permission for the file. What is executing a file, right? So I have the requirement like this, right? So sometimes, I wanted to run multiple commands on my system. Just to take an example to understand this, let's say I want to run a touch command. I want to run a mkdir command. I want to run who am I command, maybe a date command, maybe a cal command, something, right? So I want to run all of these commands, guys. So maybe my requirement is rather me going and running these commands one by one on my terminal, can I run all of these at one go? Like I will give all these commands to my bash shell. The bash will start executing them one by one. If that is the requirement, right? You can keep these commands in one single file. Then rather you executing each command yourself, you execute the file, then inside the file, whatever the commands are there, those commands will be get executed one by one by the bash shell automatically. Got me? Right? So Let me take these commands now. I'll not execute these commands one by one, guys. What I do, I'll just open one simple file. In this file, I'm going to put all of my commands. If you are using a putty, right, pasting the content is just a right click, guys. If you just do a right click, all the content will be get pasted, whichever you copied even sometime from notepad file as well. Here you copy the file using Control C, and here be in the insert mode and just do the right click so that it will be get copied. Okay. If you're on Mac or somewhere, as usual, Control C, Control V concept, right? So I'm just keeping all of my commands in a file in a series fashion. Each line is having one particular command, right? And let me save this file. Let me see the content of this F3 file, guys. Now a question for you now at this time. F3 is a file, and yes, I'm seeing the content. Is this the general regular content? No, right? The content of F3 file is something special. What is special? The content of F3 file is not a regular text. This is containing some executable commands, correct? The file that is containing some executable commands, that file is called as a scripting file. Now I'll call this F3 file as a script file. This is not a regular file. Regular file in the sense where you see some text, like we tried some, this is my first data that I entered by this user, something, right? Any English text that you are trying to keep content. That's a regular file. This F3 is not a regular file. This is called as a script file because inside the file, the content is not just simple text. This is having the bash executable instructions. Getting me? If then, now rather me executing all these commands one by one, I can execute a F3 file itself. When you execute F3 file, inside the file, everything will be executed in a series fashion, guys. That's how the executable permissions will be applicable here. Now, usually when you are running the command on your bash prompt symbol, then your system automatically understands that, okay, this command should be executed using this particular bash shell, correct? But if you are keeping the commands inside a file and you are executing a file, how would your system know that these commands should be executed using which shell? What me? Because your system has a bash shell, C shell, corn shell, and there are many. Which shell it has to use to execute these commands when you are executing the F3 file? That is something we need to tell. So usually when we are keeping some executable instructions in a file to make it as a script file, the very first line of the script is having a notation like this: slash bin slash bash is the absolute path where the bash shell script is there, and hash exclamatory is called as a shebang notation. From the terminology concept, this first line is called as a shebang notation. The shebang notation will just to let my system know that the below command should be executed using the bash shell. If you are expecting the different shell, you just mention the shell name there. Then the commands will be executed using those shells only. That's how we need to create a script file. This is called as a shebang notation. Usually if you go and see shebang notation, right, it will tell you the what is mean by the shebang notation. Now if I want to execute this F3 file, I need a execute permission, guys. id ec2 hyphen user. Now tell me guys, which permissions will be applicable for me at this time on F3 file? I'm the owner, right? I'm the owner of the file. I currently logged in as ec2 hyphen user. So the owner has RW permission. I don't have X permission. Let me give the X permission. Before that, if you want to execute a file, you just need to specify the file path. That's it. /F3. That means, hey, in my project working directory, there is a F3 file and I wanted to execute the file. That's how you need to execute a file, guys. Just, just specify the location of the file. That should be fine. Now the permission is denied. Let me give the permission. Chmod, usually when you are changing the permission of the file, you need to understand the numerical expectation, right? Let's say I need the owner to be 7. Already 6 is there. I need X permission as well. So I need 7 for owner. Group is 4. Others are 4. Then change the permission for F3. This is how we need to calculate the numerical expectation and run the command, right? Sometimes it's very difficult to calculate this whole number. Why should I be worry about group and others, correct? At this time, my requirement is I just need a X permission for owner, but I need to calculate the whole numerical numbers, right? So in that scenario, sometimes it is easy to use the symbolical method as well to change the permission. I mean to say, I want to change the permission for user or owner, both are same. Plus, I want to give the X permission for the user and hit enter. This is more easy now. You see, I got X permission for the owner. So this is also another way to change the permission. This is called as a symbolical method to change the permission, where you can use U for owner, G for group, O for others, plus for adding, minus for removing. That's how we can manage the permissions as well, guys. I got X permission. Now let me try running /F3, and you see that inside the F3 file, whatever the commands were there, all the commands got executed. You got the output. ls-l cat F3. You see, touch F8. F8 is created. mkdir dir10. dir10 is created. Who am I? That is just output, right? Output is displayed. Date command, cal command. So all the commands, whatever you given in F3, are got executed in a sequence in series, just because you executed a F file. Make sense, guys? What is execute permission for a file? Now, I'll just create one simple file. This is my content added to the file. I just added some content to my file. Now, the F8, is this the script file? No, right? This is just a regular file because the content inside the file is not a executable fashion. This is just English text. Now tell me guys, is there any meaning or is there any sense giving the X permission for this F8 file? Let's say I'm giving the X permission for F8 file, and let me try to execute the F8 file. You see, the first word, whatever you see in the file, it is treated as a command. It is trying to execute the command. No, that is not a command actually, right? So the file execute permission is meaningful only for the scripted files, not for regular files, guys. there is no use giving the X permission for a normal files, right? The X permission especially to be granted for the files that can be executable, and inside the file there is some script inside, some series of commands inside, or else there is no meaning, guys. Being said that, okay, now let's say the file default permissions are 666. Let's say my umask value will be, okay, my umask value will be, let's say 555 as an example. Now tell me guys, what will be the result? What will be your default file permissions? Correct? As per this concept. So then it will be XXX. Let me try that scenario. Umask, I'm changing the umask value. Now let me create a touch, let's say F4. Why I'm not getting XXX here? I'm getting something else. So it is not following the rule that we talked about, guys, right? So whatever we talked about some time back, this scenario will definitely works, except to the case where you are expecting the default X permission to the file. Though you give 555, you will never ever get default X permission for the files. If that is the scenario, it will avoid this calculation. It will go randomly with different permissions. You see this case? It is going with 2 permissions. Why? The only reason giving the X permission by default to the files is not recommended. There is no sense also. There is no meaning. Hence, the system will not allow you to have the X permission default to the files, because the X to be given specifically to the files which are a script files, not for all the files, right? Hence the reason this particular combination will never work. So do not consider the umask which will be resulting a X permission to the files by default. That strategy will not work, guys. Make sense? Right? In the scenario, you will not expect the same result. The practicality, it will go with a different set of permissions. That answers most of the questions that you may have. Now, I think pretty much now we are a bit good on the permission side of world, how whole permission concepts works. Now coming back to my SSH application one more time. Right? So like whenever you create a EC2 instance and you are accessing the instance using your SSH client software, and the request will go to the EC2 server. The SSHD is the service that is running on the EC2 server, right? Responsible to listen and give the response back. And we already familiar that the client should send the request by specifying the port number, because each and every service that is available in the server side is binded to the specific port number that it is responsible on, right? And these are the standard port numbers. So in this scenario, like if the client want to access the SSHD services, they have to specify the number 22 in the client side and send the request, right? Being said that, can I use this statement at this time? Any client who would like to access some services from the server side, they must be sending the request by telling the request should go to which port number. Is this a valid statement that I'm using? Any service that is offering by the server are available on the port numbers only, which can be accessible by my clients. In this scenario, the SSHD login services are accessible on port number 22. The client must be sending the request to the number 22 only to get the things done. We have proved it already by showing it in our login process. Agree with me? So another my statement, you have to support me or like don't support with my statement, right? The statement that I'm using now is the client cannot access any services that are provided by the server without a port number. Is the valid statement, guys? The client cannot access your server without a port number assignment. The port number must be there to access the services. If the client want to use SSH, send it to 22. If the client want to use HTTP, send it to 80. Like that, each service has its own number. The client has to specify that number. Your server has to get that on that number, and it will be responding back to you guys. Being said that, right? So let's say, right, if I want to improve the security of my EC2 server, in the sense, currently I'm giving this EC2 server IP address in the chat window, guys. You are all can try to logging into this instance from your SSH client like a putty. Definitely, you can access the port number 22 of this EC2 server. That is where you definitely get a login as prompt, correct? You also can try. If you use this IP address in your putty, definitely you will get a login as prompt. Of course, after the login as, though you give the username, it will not work because you don't have a proper password or a key. The authentication will fail, but at least the connectivity is happening, correct? Right? So let's say I wanted to ensure the more security for my EC2 server in a way. Okay, this is my server. I want to logging into this server. Why this server is being accessible by rest of whole world? Got me what I'm trying to? First of all, why this server is showing the login as prompt for everyone? What is the case? For some reason, if you know the username and password, you also can connect to my server, right? You can log into my server. Security violation. What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to restrict my server in a way that it is accessible only for me, not for everyone. Where do you do that? How do you improve the security of your EC2 server now? So what I can tell to my EC2 server, right? Hey EC2 server, whoever is accessing the server, they are accessing on the specific port number, right? So let me restrict this port number 22 not to be accessible by everyone. This port number 22 should be accessible by the specific set of people only, not for everyone. That's how I can do some more security standards here. To enhance the security of my EC2 server in AWS, I can create a security group. Security group is the a firewall concept in the AWS side, which will be adding the security for your EC2 server. So whenever any client who is trying to access your EC2 server, the client request will first come to the security group. If The security group is allowing this connection, then only the request will go to the server. If the security group is rejecting this request, then your request will never go to the server first of all. That means the client request is not going to SSHD service of your server directly. No, it will first come to the security group layer. The security group has a rule, a inbound rule. The rule will decide this request can be allowed or should be rejected. If the rule says that yes, this request can be allowed, then your request will be going to your server and accessing the SSHD service on number 22. If your rule doesn't allow, it will be rejected there only, guys. That's how I'm going to improve the security of my EC2 server. Following me? If then, can I do like this? In my security group, in the inbound rule, inbound in the sense the rule that is applicable for the incoming connection. In that rule, I can tell that, hey, security group, you please accept the connections only if it is coming from me, not from everyone. That kind of the rule that I'm going to add now. Then it will work only for me, not for rest of the people. How the security group know that the request is coming from me? So like every system will have a IP address, right? Like even my laptop will have a IP address. In the sense, every client will have the IP address. I can tell to security group that, hey, if the request is originated from a specific IP address, the source IP, then you accept it. If the request is not came from the specific originated IP that I'm telling, don't accept it. That's how I'm going to prepare my security group inbound rule and improve the security. Even when the SSHD is responding back the response to the client, the response also will be right passing the security group. The security group is having the outbound rule. The outbound rule is the rule that is applicable to the data or the connection that is going out from the EC2 server to somewhere else. If that rule is allowing the connection, then only that response will be going and coming back to your client. That's how the security group rules will be applicable in AWS. Shall I quickly add the security group for your EC2 server? You cannot create a EC2 server without a security group. You may be wondering now, how come my existing EC2 server is working without the security group? It is there, right? When you create a EC2 server, by default, one security group will be created allowing the connections from everywhere, right? Now, I don't want that default behavior. I wanted to restrict my security, my EC2 server. Whenever you are launching the EC2 instance, slowly I'm going into back to the AWS and going into some deeper concepts. I'm just preparing some demo server, security group, like key pair, right? Now, if you look into the networking settings, in the networking settings, if you see the default behavior, guys, the default behavior is create a security group, allow SSH traffic from anywhere, right? That is the reason why your EC2 instances are accessible by everyone at this time, because that's the default nature. By default, it gets created one. I don't want this to be. I don't want my SHS to be accessible from anywhere. Then you can do your own settings, like, right? You can create your own security group as well. How to create it? First, come back to your EC2 dashboard again. In the left side panel, if you do little scroll down, you can see a security group tab under the networking and security. This is where you can see the security groups that are already created before. You can create your own security group by clicking on this create security group. Now give the name for your security group. This is my DPT11 security group. Any name would be fine. The description, my requirement is allow SHS from PR client laptop. I'm just giving some description, right? And don't do any changes to this VPC section, guys. Don't do anything there. I'll talk about this later. The inbound role, that is where you need to tell that how it has to handle the incoming connections. Add a rule. In the type section, you select SSH. You can see that in the drop down. It is automatically taking port number 22. Now the source section. This is where you need to tell that the 22 port will be accessible for which source. Source in the sense the client laptop IP. Whoever is trying to connect, right? The client will become the source here. Here you can see anywhere option. If you choose anywhere, like, it is accessible for public internet. If you don't want it to be accessible for everywhere, you can take the IP called my IP. You see this my IP? The my IP option is automatically calculating what is the IP address of my laptop where I'm currently doing this, and that IP will be taken care. That means when the request come from this IP address, then only it will be accessible, or else no. This is my laptop IP address, guys. Like how your EC2 server has one IP, even my laptop also has one IP, right? That every device connected to the internet will definitely have an IP address. I'm telling that if someone is using the port number 22 from this laptop IP, then only accept it, or else don't accept it. That is how this inbound rule works, guys. Here, if I give your laptop IP, then it will be accessible for your laptop only, not from somewhere else. That's how it works. That is the inbound rule, right? You can even go to this custom tab and right, specify the IP address, whichever the IP that you wanted to allow. Like that, we can add. For now, let me go with my IP. The outbound rules, if you see, there is a entry already which says that all traffic should be allowed for all, like, everywhere. Whenever you see the IP as all zeros, that means everywhere. A quick question for you at this time. Do you need a security for the incoming connection or for the outgoing connection, guys? Do you need a security for the people coming into your house, or need a security for the people going out from the house? Correct? Incoming. That's the reason even here, if you see, the inbound rule is something that you decide how it has to be controlled. Outgoing is allowed for everywhere. You don't need to worry the data that is going out from the server to somewhere else. So outbound is always allowed for all the traffic for everywhere. I don't need to worry about outbound rule. Don't change anything in the outbound. just control something for the inbound only and create a security group. This is just a feedback, right? Now if you go and start creating the EC2 server, it's a small concept, but as I'm trying to cover all the corners, taking some time, I'm just creating one EC2 server, AMI instance type key pair. Now in the networking section, you see, I don't want it to create a new one. Select the existing security group. Select the security group from the drop down. Here you can see the security group that you created some time back. Select that. Then that particular inbound rules will be applicable. That's it. Go ahead and start creating a new server. Have you ever tried trying to logging into the EC2 server to the IP that I given some time back? Now I got the server, I got the IP address. I'm giving this IP address as well in the chart window. Now this IP will never work. The previous IP will work for you, not this IP. You see here, I got two servers, right? This server will definitely work because this server is attached with the security group. That security group is allowing the traffic from everywhere. Hope you are getting me, right? The first EC2 server is attached with the security group. Here I can see the security group that is attached. If I open that in a different window, right, this security group is having the inbound rule. The rule says that allow the traffic from everywhere. All zeros means everywhere. So this will accessible for everyone. But the second EC2 server that I created, this instance is attached with the security group. That security group is restricting the access to a specific source IP, right? I'm showing the configuration again. So this is allowing the 22 port number only from this source, which is my laptop IP. So now I only can access this EC2 server, not everyone. You see, I'm able to get the login as prompt because I'm able to, like, my laptop IP is added in the security group section there. Are you guys able to access this IP, guys? I'm sure no. Right? That's how I'm now controlling who can access my EC2 server by utilizing this security group inbound rule concept. The security group is mandatory. Without a security group, you cannot create a EC2 server. At least it should be having the default security group. If you don't create one, it creates one automatically. Now, it is possible to go to the existing server, to the existing security group, and then you can even edit the existing security group inbound rules also if you want to. You see, I can go to the existing security group and edit the rules. You can change the existing rule or add a new rule, whatever. That's basically, right? You can change the inbound rules of the existing security group also if you want to, and those changes will be effective immediately. The moment when you change the rules and save the rules, the changes will be effective, guys. We will usually we will never ever change the outbound rules because I don't need to worry about the outbound rules security because that is something going out from the server to somewhere else. So we don't do. But that option is given in the security group section if you really wanted to restrict something, right? Sometimes even from the server, this data should not go out. Then we can control that as well, but I'm sure we will never ever change the outbound rule security group, right? Which we don't need to worry. Whenever you have created a EC2 server with one security group at the time of launch process, later you can change the security group inbound rule, or we can change the security group also. Like you select the server, go to action, right? Maybe se security section, you see, change security groups, come here and you can add a new security group. We can delete the existing security group. We can do all these exercises, guys, right? We can add, remove, modify, all these things are possible. One EC2 server can be attached with multiple security groups also. You see here, I'm attaching 1, 2, 3 security groups to the same server, possible. Now, this server is attached with a total 3 security groups. You can see all of them in the list. When it is working right, it take care of validating the inbound rules of all the security groups. Let's say someone is trying to access port number 22. The 22 can be allowed everywhere in all of these 3 security groups, no matter, it will be allowed, right? That is also possible. When you are adding the inbound rule in your security group, you understand that you can only add a rule saying that which port you wanted to allow. There is no, sorry, there is no way that you can add a rule saying that the port has to be restricted. You got me what I'm trying to? You can have only the allow rule, not a deny rule. In this case, when you say that, hey, the 22 port number has to be allowed, that means what? Any other port numbers will be rejected by default, guys. Let's say someone is trying to access port number 80. Will that be allowed? No. Not only 80, except 22, all other port numbers are rejected. That is how the security group rules will be working, guys. So whichever the port that you want to allow, you add it into the rule and make sure that your source IP is presented there. If you are not having the port number in the rule, that is rejected by default. Are we good with this? Let me cancel over there. I think that's the overall story for today, guys, right? We just have discussed about some of the leftover Linux permission concepts and the security group concept in AWS. How do we enhance the security of your EC2, right? Using this port number concept, right? Now we can play around with this security group in your EC2 server and how it is working by changing that number 22, my IP, anywhere, something like that, and see the behavior, guys. Yeah, if any questions, do let me know, or else we are good for today. We'll continue this topic tomorrow as well, right? Tomorrow I'll try to bring up one website. We'll talk about that. Well, I hope you like the session. If any questions, do let me know, guys, or else we are good for today.
Sir, can you explain again this batch profile? Talk.
Okay. So I'll definitely talk about that, right? When you are working in an IT industry, right, asking the right question to get a right answer is also a skill, right? So let's say I already covered the bash profile concept. Now you should be asking me, pointing to the specific question where you are having a question or a doubt, something like this. You got me what I'm trying to? I'll cover the topic, but I'm trying to give this instruction as well. That way, in real time when you are working, you can have your thought process. I mean to say, asking a right question is important, right? So sometimes your manager know everything. He will not tell you until unless you ask the right question, right? That happens. Okay. So being said that, now tell me, in the bash profile concept, what is the specific doubt or the specific question that you wanted to get clarified?
So do you tell about two files, etc profile and bash underscore profile? You write some you for user
So
something you write.
if you are keeping your configuration, if you are keeping your settings in the ECC profile file, that will be applicable for all the users. Let's say your system is having some 10 users. Anything that you keep in this file will be applicable for all the 10 users, right? So if you are keeping something in the bash profile which is available in every home directory, let's say if there are 10 users, each user's home directory, this file will be there. Got me? All the 10 users will have this file in their home directory. So this file is applicable only for that specific user where you are doing the change. So let's say you mask. What is your requirement? You are expecting all the 10 users should have the same umask value. Then you edit it in the etc profile file. No, I don't want everyone to be on the same umask value. User 1 to be a different umask, user 2 to be a different umask. Then you edit the umask value in the .bash underscore profile file of each and every user's individual file in their home directory. Got me?
Yeah, got it, sir.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Just like when we install Java in Windows, so they are to system and user
Yes.
in environment.
Yeah, Praveen, I have a question. See,
Yes.
one user have multiple groups. Suppose I am creating a file and I'm trying to give a permissions to the another user. That user is there in my group as well as in another group. Okay, if I give permissions to him, like he means whatever the group I belongs to, okay, will he get the permissions or which will shows the primary and all.
Well, so I think, right, just to simplify this, okay, to simplify this, right, let's take this F4 file. Whichever the user is trying to access this file, that user is the owner, is part of the same group, or will become others. Those are the three checks that we need to do. Doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter you are in which group, the other guy is in which group. I don't need to compare all of this. Simply put, right? If the Venkat user is accessing the F4 file, the Venkat user is the owner? No. Is he part of the same group? Yes or no? Or others? Those are the checks that we need to do to understand what permissions will be applicable for this file, right? the Venkat user group, the DevOps group can be a primary group of the Venkat user, can be a secondary group in the Venkat user, doesn't matter.
Okay.
As long as the user is part of the group, either it is a primary or secondary, doesn't matter. You are able to, you are eligible to use these group permissions. The reason is, whenever that group is a primary for you, obviously that will be added as a secondary group. You see this scenario? For this user, the primary group is DevOps. This is even appeared in the secondary group section as well, right? So that's how it works, right? So the primary group is just to ensure that the user's default group will be assigned. That's only the reason of why the primary group is mentioned there. But that is also part of the secondary group anyway. I don't need to worry about that. That is primary or secondary.
Okay. Okay. What is the benefit of like how we can make it like default group or primary group or secondary group?
You don't need to decide that actually, right? So you understand the concept, why primary, why secondary, how it is working, how the group is helping to access the permissions. The business will decide in the sense that tomorrow when you're working in any project, your manager, your architect will decide which user should be part of which group, which should be primary, which should be secondary. That decision is something will be done from the architect level, from business side of world. We'll know more on what basis the decisions will be happen down the line once we go into the application level.
Okay. Okay. See, like I belongs to DevOps group as well as one more group like something like Docker group. Okay. So when I create the file permissions like display like Venkat and the DevOps or Venkat and the Docker or something like that.
No,
Display like based on primary, right?
it's based on primary. The primary can be only one group. Either you decide when you create a file, you want the file to be created in DevOps group or in Docker group or in AWS group, which you are expecting. It should be only one group always.
Okay, how I can make that? How I can
That is, that is your primary group, right? Let's say group add AWS is also already there, right? Docker. So usually when you create a user, your user's primary group will be the same as your username. That's the default nature, right?
Yeah.
So let's say if the Venkat user logged in and if this user is creating a file, the file to be created in the DevOps group, then the DevOps will be your primary group. So I need to make the DevOps as the primary group for you. When the DevOps is the primary group, now onwards, when you create a file, the file will be get created with the DevOps group. That's the default nature.
Okay, got it. If I wanted to access some other file which is in a Docker group, like I have to get the permissions from the owner, right?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Clear.
Well, team, then no questions. We are good for today. Keep continue learning the things.